I've had many parishioners, and now some of you, come to talk to me about race. The conversations vary depending on who the other person is or what the other person is. How someone identifies themselves will change, shape the conversation. When white people come to talk, I usually hear one of the following. I never thought about it before, and now I don't know what to do with what I now know. I feel guilty. What about reverse racism? I'm ashamed. I hate being white. Why didn't I get any of this while I was growing up? Well, I've experienced depression too. I'm not a racist, am I? Slavery was so long ago, why can't they just get over it? I know about systemic racism, but I wonder, can it change? What can I do? Then there are the people who seem to have it all together. They know everything about racism and their white privilege, and they come across as though they don't have anything to learn. Sometimes they're the most scary people of all. The recent election season has pulled back the curtain, and we are all more aware than ever that even in this room, we have different points of view. I invite all of us to be honest, to admit that white privilege is present and a part of our world. We must have authentic conversations about white privilege, and I think the people who can best hold white people accountable is other white people. This is difficult, challenging, and sometimes painful work. So often our conversations about racism center on what it is like to be the recipients of racism, when I think it would be so beneficial and actually transformative to engage in what it means to live and move around one's daily life with white privilege. What we have inherited without doing anything, what we have benefited from without knowing about it or having any acknowledgement of it. When we have these conversations, it is also so very important to have someone who is confident and trustworthy in the room. Our speaker today knows how to talk about white privilege as a white person. Dr. Robyn D'angelo is so passionate about this work that she gave up being a tenured professor in order to dedicate her life to this calling. She knows how to clearly and compellingly take her audience through an analysis of white socialization. She describes how race shapes the lives of white people, explains what makes racism so hard for whites to see, identifies common white racial patterns, and speaks back to popular white narratives that work to deny racism. Robyn has an enormous amount of experience talking with both academic and non-academic audiences about race, racism, and inequality, about ways we talk and don't talk about privilege, about whiteness and what she calls racial illiteracy. Given all of this, it is no surprise that she won the Student's Choice Award for Educator of the Year for her teaching, not once, but twice. Professor D'angelo has a PhD in multicultural education from the University of Washington. She has taught courses on multicultural teaching, intergroup dialogue facilitation, cultural diversity and social justice, and anti-racist education. She has been a consultant and trainer for over 20 years on issues of racial and social justice and was recently appointed to co-design, develop, and deliver the City of Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative anti-racism training. One of her goals is for white people to become more involved in dismantling systems of racism and racial inequality. Robyn argues that a number of factors make this question difficult for white people. Miseducation about what racism is, ideologies such as individualism or colorblindness and defensiveness, and the tendency to protect rather than expand our worldviews. These factors all contribute to what she terms white racial illiteracy. Especially now, there are so many reasons to learn about how whiteness works so that we can talk with each other better and hear each other more clearly. This event was proposed by Professor Amy Singer and Professor Stephanie McNulty. It is sponsored by the Departments of Government and Sociology, the Office of the Dean of the College, and the Center for Liberal Arts and Society. You are invited to join in breaking of bread of sorts at the new College House when this talk is over. And so now will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Robyn D'angelo.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very cool introduction to sit and listen to. So I am white, check me out. And part of being white is that goes against all my socialization, to be drawing your attention to my race as if it had any relevance. I was taught not to see myself as having a race. I mean, somebody had race, it wasn't me. And certainly was not taught to see it as having any significance. I'm really clear today, after many, many years of struggle, practice, mistake-making, study, education, research, relationship building, that I am white. And that I have a white frame of reference, a white worldview, and I move through the world with a white experience. And it is not just a universal human experience, it is a most particularly white experience in a society that is deeply separate and unequal by race. So while I'm always coming from that position, I want to be really clear that that's where I'm speaking from today, and primarily to other white folks. When I talk about we and us, we are the majority in pretty much any room that I am in, certainly the majority around the tables and halls of power, where decisions are made that affect other people's lives. And you know, up until very recently, you could be seen as qualified to lead a major institution in this country without any ability to engage with nuance and complexity in issues of race. Right? You could get through graduate school without ever discussing racism. You could get through law school without discussing racism. You could get through teacher education without discussing racism, right? So we really have not had to engage. We have not built the skills to do that. Nothing in dominant society gives us the information we need to have the complex, nuanced understanding of arguably the most complex, nuanced social dynamics since the beginning of this country. So our challenge for those of us who are white in this room today is to reach for humility. You all have opinions on this topic. I've never met a white person without an opinion on racism. Have you? If you're not sure, just bring it up at your next family dinner, right? You can't hear? Somebody said they couldn't hear.
And it's probably because...
Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can have an opinion. I have an opinion on basically everything, but I'm also really clear that on most topics it's not informed. So try to relax into it, and if I do a good job in my very brief time with you, you will not be comfortable. You will feel challenged and maybe in moments defensive, and that's actually a good thing. The racial status quo for white folks is comfortable pretty much 24/7, and I don't really want to reinforce that. I want to get us a little out of our comfort zones. So let's start by acknowledging that this talk takes place on the ancestral territories of indigenous peoples. Does anybody know whose ancestral territories we are on right now? Okay, I'm not hearing any answers, so it's just worth it to notice. There's a very deep disconnect in our culture from our history, with this kind of idea that it's long ago and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't bear on today. I believe very deeply that in order to understand how we came to the moment we're at, how we continue to reproduce such racial inequity, we have to understand our history, and we have to be able to trace it into the present. So by every measure across every institution in this country, there's racial disparity. And I don't spend any energy proving that. I think we all know, despite the ideologies of meritocracy and individualism, I think we all understand that we live in a deeply racially disparate society across every institution, and empirical data comes in daily attesting to that. Right? And yet, at the same time, what is today's, these are coming up together, dominant racial narrative? Well, I'm a former professor of education, so I used to teach in a large teacher training institution. We put out hundreds of future teachers every year. The program was 98% white. It was rare for me to ever have a student of color in any class, and we were 10 miles from a city that was 57% black and Latino, Springfield, Massachusetts. And on the first day of class, I would ask my students, take out a piece of paper and write me an anonymous reflection on some of the ways in which your race has shaped your life. How racially diverse were your schools and neighborhoods growing up? What are some messages you've received? And how, again, does your race shape your life? And what I'm going to show you is representative of the virtually hundreds of these anonymous reflections I have from our future teachers in their junior and senior years of university, soon to be certified as highly educated, and soon to go forth and teach in those schools in Springfield. My neighborhood growing up was not racially diverse at all. Every family in my neighborhood was also Caucasian. Throughout my time in school, I have continually been taught that skin does not matter. Is that familiar to you? It should be, because this is today's dominant racial narrative. This is a post-civil rights narrative, not a pre-civil rights narrative, but it is ubiquitous. This is the younger generation, you know, the one that when my generation dies off, there'll be no more racism because the young people are so much more open. I'm poking fun a little bit at that narrative, in case you didn't notice. I don't think this is any more progressive. It's an adaptation for sure, but it is not fundamentally in any way challenging racism. In fact, it functions to obscure it. Right? And notice that this is really all this student could be bothered to write, 3 sentences. And I see a really big contradiction in those 3 sentences. Right? So if race doesn't matter, why so separate? Right? And then from that comes a question. How do we actually teach that race doesn't matter in segregation? And I'm going to argue we don't. We don't teach that at all. We say that. It is not the practice of our actual lives, and the practices of our lives are so much more powerful than the words that we say. So we're going to do a just quick definitions. Prejudice is prejudgment. It includes stereotypes, bias, both conscious and unconscious, or explicit and implicit. All human beings have prejudice. It's not humanly possible to avoid prejudice. We are not objective. No human can be objective. Everybody has it, and when we act on it, we're now discriminating. Right? So we can remove the word reverse from any discussion of prejudice and discrimination because it's a kind of ridiculous. Everybody has it. Everybody does it. But when you take a group's collective prejudice and you back it with legal authority and institutional control, it's transformed. And now you have a group in a position to embed and fuse their prejudice into the very fabric and foundation of the entire society, both consciously and unconsciously. And no one has to individually do anything or intend to do anything. The society itself will reproduce the inequality. So oppression gets embedded in all the institutions, but also in cultural definitions of what is normal, real, correct, beautiful, and valuable. Whose story is told, whose is not, and who tells those stories. Right? So by definition, oppression includes the weight of history, legal authority, and institutional control. And so by definition, it is a one-way power relationship. When we raise up the words that capture different forms of oppression, sexism, classism, racism, we are including the weight of power behind that act or dynamic. So there is also no reverse form of oppression. There is no reverse form of racism. And that was a super quick definition on something that I know is very challenging for folks. So there's lots of writing out there if you want to understand more that definition and that conceptualization. So racism is a system. It's backed by legal authority. It works on multiple levels, and it results in an unequal distribution of resources between white people overall and people of color overall, with white people the beneficiaries of that distribution. Now, Marilyn Frye is a scholar who has the metaphor of a bird cage to help push against this dominant conceptualization of it's all about individuals, right? It's just all about intentions, and if I'm an open-minded person and I have no intention to hurt anyone across race, I'm free of racism, right? That's the dominant conceptualization. And she's trying to get us to understand it's the very water we're all enmeshed in, and we are all colluding in it in different ways, and our task is to become conscious of how we're doing that so that we can stop doing that to the best of our ability. So she uses this metaphor of a bird cage, that oppression is similar. If you put your face all the way up to that cage, and you look at the bird, you're taking a very micro or myopic view, and you're not going to see the cage at all, right? You're just going to be like, what's the problem? Like, if the little door is open, the bird could fly away. Why don't they just do this or that? Then they wouldn't have their problems. If you take a macro view, if you begin to step back and take a wider view, you will begin to see those bars. You will begin to see their interlocking nature. And you will begin to understand that while it doesn't make it impossible for the bird to fly away, it makes it very unlikely, enables us to literally predict the chances of that happening. And certainly that bird is navigating barriers a bird outside the cage is not navigating. So what are some of those? Our institutions, our ideology, our history, our culture, constant microaggressions, constant threat of violence, internalized oppression, isolation, rewards for conformity, invisibility, the burden of representation, unacknowledged historical trauma, to name a few. So again, she's working on, with this metaphor, pushing against this idea that it's just about individuals' intentions. At the same time, post-civil rights, racism, being the adaptive system that it is, it became, to be a good moral person and to be complicit with racism became mutually exclusive, so that you couldn't be a good moral person and be complicit with racism. And I think this is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. Have any of you noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Okay. I think it's all rooted in this idea. You just said I was a bad person. You just gave me a moral insult, and I must defend my character. And the only way to defend my character is to categorically deny that that could have been anything racist or to do with racism. And so I'm going to put all my energy there, and I'm going to go on and on about what I really meant and how you misunderstood, and et cetera, right? And so it just functions beautifully. It seems like a positive change post-civil rights. I mean, racism became bad. Racism is bad in a certain kind of way. But it ended up functioning to make it impossible for us to look at our inevitable participation in it, so that all our energy goes to deflect, defend, rather than reflect, actually for the rest of our lives. Because the messages of white superiority, which I will help you see in a moment, are circulating 24/7. This wasn't one time I heard a joke when I was a child. This is 24/7 reinforcement of racist messages. And so really for the rest of my life, I need to be paying attention and challenging those messages. So we know how to fill this in, right? Our racists are bad, and they're ignorant and bigoted and prejudiced. They're mean-spirited. They're old. They're Southern. They drive pickup trucks. We've got to get a little classism in there. And I don't know around here where they live. Where would they live around here? Let's see. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, okay. And then our not racist, I know how to do the not racist for sure. We're educated, progressive, open-minded, well-intended, young, northern. We shop at the food co-op, not Whole Foods, because that's a corporation. We drive Priuses, and we're moving to Portland as soon as we graduate. Portland, Oregon. Okay. So you get my drift here, right? This kind of either or. And we have got to get rid of this. It just functions so beautifully to separate ourselves and distance ourselves. It is not a matter of being a good or a bad person. All right, so this is my metaphor. I love metaphors. They work for me when I'm conceptualizing ideas that can be a little bit dense, right? So I have this really weird job for a living now that I resigned from academia. Every day I stand in front of rooms full of people and start talking about racism. And it's something that most white folks avoid doing. But in doing it, I hear the same narratives again and again, right? And it's as if somebody just handed us a script. And they have handed us a script. It's called socialization, right? And as I listen to these narratives, this image came to my mind of a dock or a pier. And what that signifies is how surface and superficial these narratives are, how rarely interrogated or problematized. So let's see if you don't recognize them. Oop, too fast. I was taught to treat everyone the same. Okay? How many of you were taught to treat everyone the same? Okay, you're going to not be happy with me right now. Are you ready? No, you weren't. Not one person in this room was taught to treat everyone the same. Okay, now what do I mean by that? It's not humanly possible. You can be told. I'm sure you were told. Just like I could get up here and lecture you for an hour, don't judge. Judging's not nice. We're all good to go? No more judging? Right? You can't. So you can be told, but you can't actually be taught that in a way that you can learn it. And I'm going to be honest with you. When I hear this, and trust me, I think this is the number one narrative, the bubble over my head is, doesn't understand basic socialization, doesn't understand culture, and is not very self-aware. Okay? And I'm going to tell you it's not convincing evidence for people of color either. I see people as individuals. I don't care if you're pink, purple, yellow, or polka dotted. That's similar. If anyone in this room has that in their vocabulary, pink, purple, polka dotted, please remove it and never say it again, okay? I have a captive audience. I want you to get rid of reverse, and I want you to get rid of these nonsensical colors that people don't come in and that actually convey a dismissive, I'm not going to take the conversation seriously. Racism in the past, everyone struggles. My parents weren't racist, that's why I'm not racist. My parents were racist, that's why I'm not racist. It doesn't matter what goes first, what comes second must always be, I'm not racist. Right? So-and-so just happened to be black, but has nothing to do with the conflict we're all having with her. This is another one that I would ask you to consider removing from your vocabulary when discussing issues of race. This kind of regardless of race just happened to be. What we're doing in that move is we're positioning some kind of universal reality or experience, and you just can't. I might not know what race has to do with the conflict or the interaction, but I have to be willing to look at it. If you know anything about the studies, the resume study, studies on implicit bias, we know empirically that race is in our perceptions with each other. And you simply can't take it off the table. So these are all colorblind, right? So most people understand today, not everyone, but most people understand it's not realistic, it's not possible, we're not actually colorblind at all, and it's really just function to deny anything's going on and to deny racism. That's how this has functioned. So what do the more progressive, co-op shopping, cloth bag carrying, Prius driving progressives say? I do like to make fun of progressives. That's because I am one. And I know how we think. I actually think white progressives are the most challenging. Because the degree to which we think we're down and we're good to go because, gosh, we spent a week in Costa Rica, we're going to we're going to spend all our energy kind of trying to make sure you know we're down to, and none of our energy doing what we need to be doing. There's a kind of complacency there that is just not okay, and that equals some pretty deep arrogance. So what do we say? Well, we say stuff like this. Oh, I work in a very diverse environment. Yeah. I have people of color in my family. I'm not racist. I used to live in New York. And I'm always like, you're kidding. You walked by people of color and you didn't lose your shit? You are amazing. Okay. So how many of you, in a discussion with a white person on racism, have heard some version of these? Okay, so just about everybody, because these are the more progressive versions, right? These are not the colorblind, these are the celebrate. So let's do a little discourse analysis, right? Let's unpack these a bit. So a white person who invokes one of these is giving you their evidence, right? Here's my evidence. In my mind, what is this my evidence of? I'll just answer, because call and response is kind of weird with this many people. I'm giving you my evidence that I'm not racist, right? So I'm not racist. Here's my evidence. If this is my evidence, what's my definition of racism? See, this is really important to be able to do, both for when you're trying to move someone else forward and in your own unraveling of your socialization to be complicit with racism. Right? So much of how we understand what it is functions to protect it, right? The way we're taught to understand what it is. In other words, if I see it as simply conscious dislike, of which I have none, I'm done. I'm outside of this, right? So it really just functions to protect. So I would say that if this is my evidence for why I'm not racist, then clearly a racist couldn't live in New York, so there are no racists in New York, couldn't work 3 cubicles down, or sit in a class with a person of color, or have people of color in their family. So I think right there we know that's not good evidence. Because even there are avowed, boy, do we know this now, there are avowed white supremacists, right? There are people who openly say yes to it. They can do all these things. You know this, right? So not so good evidence that way. But also, again, it just rests on such a narrow understanding and no awareness of implicit bias or racism as a system. So let's look for a moment of, I have people of color in my family, because that one's a little more sensitive. I know for me, one of the most powerful interruptions to my socialization has been to work hard to build authentic cross-racial relationships, because very little in my life set that up to happen. That does not free our relationship of racism. That does not free me of racism. Right? So this definition is also just basically, as long as there is fond regard, as long as I am friendly and I smile at people, there's no racism. Again, a really problematic, simplistic understanding of what it is. We will struggle. If I have an intimate relationship with a person of color, we're going to struggle with racism in our relationship. It's going to come up. We were socialized differently. People are responding to us differently. We have different experiences out in the world. And we seem to be able to do this with gender. Okay? So I'm going to use cisgender terms here. How many people in the room who identify as women have a primary partnership with a man? Okay. I'm going to pick on you because... So, the day he fell in love with you, both of you over there, the day he fell in love with you, all his sexism vanished, correct? It didn't. But he loves you. How could he possibly have any sexism, unconscious or otherwise? And if you're not sure about your current partner, just think about your ex. And I'll give a shout out to the men. Does anything about your female partners, those of you that have them, frustrate you around gender? You will be dealing with gender dynamics in your relationship for the rest of your relationship. We would never go, oh yeah, I'm married, therefore I have a gender-free life. Are you kidding, right? And yet, notice how we do it with race. As soon as there's fond regard, all question of racism disappears. all race dynamics disappear. So just keep noticing that. All right, what else do we have on here? Children are so much more open. This romanticization of children is really problematic. The research shows really clearly that by age 3 to 4, all children who grow up in the US understand the racial order by age 3 to 4. I'm going to say this a little more directly. All children understand by age 3 or 4 that it's better to be white. That's hard for me to say. That is the message. It's 24/7. It's better to be white. Children don't miss that message. And when we leave them unattended because we project some kind of romanticization on them, some racial innocence onto them, we leave them unattended to that message. And what it does to me and my daughter, who is white, is very different than what it does to a person of color and their child who is not. But they do know. I already know all this. This is kind of that very problematic complacency. Oh, we don't like how white our neighborhood is, but we had to move here for the schools. Okay, you know I can talk about that, but I find it disingenuous. I think we actually do like how white our neighborhoods are, and we've worked hard to keep them that way. So these are the love diversity set, but I'm hoping you can see how problematic they are and how they actually function. And they all are resting on something, right? They're resting on a foundation that props them up and allows us to pull those narratives off, right? That's kind of the question that drives my work. How do we pull that off? How do we live such separate lives and then pull those narratives off? So that's what I want to map out in the next part of this. And I want you to think to yourself for a moment about how racially diverse your neighborhood, or neighborhoods if you move frequently, how racially diverse was your neighborhood, childhood, growing up? And what messages did you get about race from your childhood neighborhood? If you were like the vast majority of white people in this nation, your answer is my neighborhood was white. I grew up in a primarily white neighborhood. I'm going to use my language very deliberately here. Most white people grow up in racial segregation. And the reason I think it's important to use that word is we tend to think about it as some tragedy that was imposed upon blacks in the Jim Crow South. Whites live the most segregated lives. It's segregation that we choose, and that is the result of decades of policies and practices. Used to be more formal, now less formal, but well documented. So the messages we get from growing up in segregation are, it's normal to be apart. It might even be natural to be apart. That's an ideology. I actually don't think it's natural, but we are told that it's just natural. It's right. On some level, it's right that we should live apart. I mean, certainly nobody's saying it's a problem that we live apart. You're absorbing this. You have to make sense of the world as a child. And again, there's the things that are said, but then there's the actual practices which are most profound. So supposedly everyone's equal, but we don't live together. And then how do we talk about our spaces? Well, generally a white neighborhood is a good neighborhood. It is a safe neighborhood. It is a sheltered neighborhood. We are lucky and fortunate. Those are very powerful words. Because by definition, someplace is not safe, is not desirable, is not sheltered, is scary, is dangerous. Think about the images and associations you had with black and brown spaces. Were you encouraged to know and explore those places? I doubt it. If you were white and you didn't grow up in a primarily white neighborhood, you were probably poor and working class, urban poor and working class. And you probably no longer live in those neighborhoods because upward mobility would take you away, and we always know that. If we're going to improve our lives, we're going to get away from black and brown space. So I want to introduce that idea to you and hope you will spend a long time following this talk thinking deeply about the messages of the practice of segregation. And then, when's the first time you had a teacher the same race or races, if you're multiracial, as you? How often did that happen? When's the first time you had a teacher of a different race than you? How often? And why might that matter? I think what you discover is that our teachers are our role models, are holders of authority, are holders of knowledge. They impart a worldview to us. They decide who is smart, who is good, who belongs where. And the vast majority of people in the United States can get through graduate school without, if you're white, without ever having a teacher that doesn't reflect your own race, or rarely, and if you're a person of color, rarely, if ever. Right? Now, the teaching force is getting more, not less, white. It's about 83 to 93% white nationwide, and schools are almost back to pre-Brown versus Board of Education levels of segregation. Those white teachers grow up the way most all other white people grow up. So where are we getting our understanding of people of color? From the most problematic sources, certainly not from authentic, sustained variety of cross-racial relationships, right? From media and movies and jokes and omissions and warnings. But now I'm in this position to decide. And you essentially have the school-to-prison pipeline. Again, empirically shown that these decisions are made with racial inequity. Seattle Public Schools, big progressive Seattle, Washington, is under federal investigation right now for racial disparity in those outcomes. So a friend of mine puts it like this, and I think it's powerful. Pretty much all of us have been taught by white people, who've 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 been taught by white people, using textbooks written for, by, and about white people. Starting to get the weight of the white worldview and how it shapes how we think about ourselves and our place in the world. And I came across this image, and I thought, that's the image for this part of my talk. This is this year's college Jeopardy champion playoffs. Those are our best and our brightest. And this is the board at the end of the grand champion round. This is an actual photograph. I did block the category for just a moment. And as we can see, there is one category now, one of them touched. So nobody was going to risk losing, and we can assume that was the hardest category. Okay, again, college champions. Yep. It's just one image, but it just beautifully captures, I think, that disconnect. I actually can't do justice, I don't feel, to what it means that we don't know our history. This disconnect. This is my history. You know what's going to be under that category, right? Civil War and civil rights, always. That's the history of our people in struggle, right? This is not their history. It happened in a vacuum. I don't know how we could possibly study our country and our culture without knowing our history. So Joe Fagan is a sociologist who has the concept of the white racial frame, and you can think of that as the theoretical articulation of my pillars, right? So it is the deeply internalized framework through which whites make racial meaning. It includes images, interpretations, etc., that position whites as superior and that are passed down and reinforced across society. So this is, again, how we get those relentless messages. I'm going to start showing you some images that I think capture the white racial frame. This is on a science website right now. What would a scientifically perfect face look like? Scientifically perfect. I mean, this is science, you know. I was on a Delta flight last year. This was in the In-Flight magazine. Had to get this ad. I was like, okay, look at the racial hierarchy in this ad. It's so clear. You're white women in the front, red hair, wearing green, Asian women in the middle, literally wearing yellow, black women in the back wearing brown. So that's the first thing. All of these ads are constantly communicating relationships, status, hierarchy. That's the first thing I noticed. And then it's an ad for a purse. Look at the three sets of women's hands. What do you notice? The black women's hands are empty. They don't even have the purse. You know, in the back, their hands are empty. Again, you only look at ads for a second, but they don't stand alone. I could talk for an hour on this movie, but I think that this picture really captures the essential dynamic. I was looking at CNN last year, and most beautiful women from around the world representing South Africa, 92% black country. Not one Asian woman in the spread. Asian women are the majority of all women on the planet. So I'm going to just do a quick little how does my race shape my life, and everything I'm about to say, all the other white folks in this room can also say, and no person of color in this room can also say, right, in the U.S. context. So first of all, I was born into a culture in which I belong. I belong in virtually any situation deemed normal, neutral, or valuable. I belong at that administration meeting, at that church service, at that block party, dealing with my daughter's teachers, her camp counselors. I belong at that wedding. How many of you have been to a wedding? If it wasn't all white, it was pretty close. Just this relentless belonging. I don't carry the psychic burden of race. Represented in the government. We certainly know the presidency and vice presidency. And this is the House of Representatives. It's 83% white. And I'm going to show you a series of photographs now where you see the yellow border around the picture. Those are the people of color in this particular group. These are the U.S. senators. These are the leaders of the largest U.S. companies. This is the U.S. Supreme Court. These are the U.S. governors. These are the U.S. top military advisors. These are the people who decide which TV shows we see. These are the people who choose which movies get made. These are the people with the most influence over which books we read. If you were getting a sense of the weight of the white worldview from the teachers, keep adding to it. These are the people who decide which music gets produced. People who decide what news is covered, owners of men's pro basketball teams, because we also live in patriarchy, owners of men's pro football teams, owners of men's pro baseball teams, presidents of Ivy League universities. Okay, you have to believe me that I'm not attached to whether this is a Republican or Democrat, but this picture for me, this is Paul Ryan and his this year's incoming interns, and for me, this is what it means to be white. This is my world, this is my life, this is the inclusion, the networking, the opportunity, the segregation, the lack of a loss about it. Can you imagine what's open to these young people interning with Paul Ryan, right? This is what it means to be white. Well, I don't know that there's a more powerful image than God. I was raised Catholic. So that's what I saw when I looked up. There's God creating man. There's Jesus and Mary. You know, as a little girl, I didn't look up and go, oh, God is white. I mean, it's this relentless affirmation. Constant messages that it's better to be white. I pulled from these magazines because they surround us at the checkout line. We have best hair. Halle Berry is here with best hair. Her hair is straightened. It's a very powerful message to black women in particular. Here is last year's World's Most Beautiful Woman. Here is the sexiest man alive. Did you know that? This is the sexiest man on this planet. And this year's World's Most Beautiful Woman. We're all walking by, all children. Racially affirmed throughout my childhood. For me, we'll just capture it right here. No little girl misses this message. These are this year's top 5 Miss Teen USA. And yes, they're different girls. But I just wanted to take a moment, right? Miss Teen USA, this, right? And here's the group they drew from. And it's always that, right? 1, maybe 2, to the back or to the side. This is what it means to be white. I'm trying to make a point here. You have a white frame of reference if you are white, and it's particular. It's not universal, and it shapes how you come to the table, and you've got to examine it. These are shows that many of us grew up with. They took place across the decades, so Seinfeld in the 80s, Sex and the City in the 90s, Friends in the 2000s, that's Gossip Girl. This is the current show, Girls. Every one of these shows takes place in New York City. Every one of these shows is about ideal friendship. So the message again and again and again is that even amongst racial diversity, there's no inherent value in an integrated life. That the ideal world is a white world, the ideal life. So I'm going to close this part by saying that the most powerful way that my life has been shaped by my race is that I could be born into, I could learn, I could play, I could worship, I could study, I could love, I could work, and I could die in racial segregation. And not one single person in my life who's ever loved me or mentored me has ever conveyed to me that I've lost anything. I'm going to say this again a couple times, a couple ways, because I think it is the most powerful message of all, of what sociologists call new racism. Right? I could go to my grave. That could be my funeral, because my wedding looked a lot like that. I could go to my grave without really knowing people of color, and no one suggested any loss. In fact, white people measure the value of our lives by the absence of people of color. We know what a good school is. We know why it's good. We know what a good neighborhood is, and we know why it's good. We communicate this to each other all the time. Keep thinking about that. Calling segregation for whites good is a very powerful message. So the default of this society is the reproduction of racism, and it depends on nothing more than white people just being really nice and carrying on. Just be really nice. Smile at the folks of color. And you will beautifully uphold it. And I'm not telling you not to be nice, but niceness is not courageous. Niceness will not get racism on the table. It will not keep it on the table when everyone wants it off the table, right? In fact, anti-racism is not very nice from the dominant frame, right? Because it's uncomfortable. And niceness says, let's keep people comfortable, which means let's protect white supremacy. Right? And by the way, this culture I'm trying to have you see, I think white supremacy is a perfect term for it. White as superior, as the ideal for humanity, as the human norm. So if we go and we look at what is propping this up, I think the good-bad binary is incredibly effective. Implicit bias, which you cannot help absorb. This individualism, this idea that we're all unique, and gosh, if you just knew this about me, you'd know why I was less racist than other people. This idea that we can be exempt somehow. Universalism is this counter idea that we can represent everybody. We're all good people here. We can speak for everybody. Internalized superiority. I hope I've made my case. You cannot avoid having internalized superiority if you are white, and you need to work on it constantly. And on some level, investment in the racial order. How would we not be invested in this? I am invested in this, and that's not acceptable to me at the same time. And so I've committed my life to constantly trying to identify those investments. I'll never be done. And then the power of segregation to hold it all in place. So this comes up, I'm going to go quick here and get to these are often patterns, and all this stuff you could actually download from my website if you're wanting to see them. And when any of this gets challenged, we kind of fall apart. It's what I call white fragility. And it's not weakness, right? When people hear the word fragile, it just means I cannot tolerate you challenging my position, my worldview, my entitlement. And so I need to stop you from doing that, and I'll do whatever it takes. So if I need to cry, I'll cry. But if I need to get my back up, and I'll do that. But I'm going to make it so miserable for you. Let me ask the folks of color in the room. How often have you tried to give white people feedback on our inevitable, but often unaware racist patterns and had that go well for you? All right, did you hear that? That laughter? Rarely, right? We make it so difficult that people stop trying. And then we think, we're cool. Nobody's saying there's a problem here. So this is what we need to have it look like under the surface. This is the slide I'm going to end with as a kind of counter to what's under there now, right? So being good or bad is not relevant. It's not about that. Racism is a multi-layered system. It's infused in everything. Whites have blind spots on racism. I have blind spots on racism. It's complex. I don't have to understand it for it to be valid. White comfort maintains the status quo, so discomfort is necessary and important, but I must not confuse comfort with safety. I'm perfectly safe in discussions of racism. The antidote to guilt is action. I bring my group's history with me. History matters. I don't get to just be an individual. I am also a product of my society. The question is not if, but how. It's 24/7. So I don't say, was that or wasn't that racism? I say, how was racism manifested in that interchange or that dynamic? Let's try to see. Bias is implicit, unconscious. I don't have to be aware of mine in order to have it. Feedback from people of color indicates trust. It's an incredible moment of risk across power. Feedback is difficult to give. How I receive it is not as relevant as the feedback itself. It takes courage to break with white solidarity. So how can I support other white folks who do? Given socialization, it's much more likely that I'm the one that doesn't understand the issue. And racism hurts, even kills people of color 24/7. Interrupting it is so much more important than my ego, my self-image, or my feelings, right? Thank you. So if people say, what do I do? Whatever it takes to truly make this real for you and internalize it. So let me tell you that it is the most liberating, transformative work you can do. It's not about feeling bad. Probably noticing I'm a fairly empowered person. And I'm clear as a bell that I've been thoroughly inculcated in this water. And when you start from the premise that, of course, you have racist patterns and blind spots, those of us who are white, then you eagerly seek to identify them so you can interrupt them, rather than what we do now, which is eagerly seek to deny them. So thank you very much for your time.
Hi, I'm Raven. I'm a senior sociology major here. And I'm in Professor Rondini's racial and ethnic relations class. One time we were briefly talking about how we talk about race among our friends, our family, and it came up that, you know, a friend of color in the class always mentioned race. They say, oh, my black friend or my Latino friend or, and my Indian friend, my Asian friend, to give kind of a context. And I said, you know, in my family, I tried to avoid it, you know, but with a white family, there are these instances where I'll, you know, talk about this friend for a long period of time, and then if my parents actually meet that friend, they go, oh, I didn't know they were Asian, you know, and for some reason something clicks in them. They're like, oh, well, that makes sense. Now that action that you told me they did makes sense. And so I was wondering, just thinking about these social schemas that we're raised with, talking about race, do you think it helps, like, kind of perpetuate stereotypes to, you know, to preface a conversation and go, oh, you know, oh, my black friend, you know, we were going to the mall or whatever, versus just saying my friend, you know, because I think there is this assumed if you're just talking about someone and you don't say their race, that they're white.
Yes, it tends to be. So the first thing is that just have fun with it and always name the race of everyone white in your life, right? So that's kind of fun. So kind of do that, right? It's that moment of, and then ask yourself, is the person's race relevant? If it's a person of color, is their race relevant to what I'm talking about? If we went to the mall and we got followed around and I want to tell about that, then it is relevant. But if it isn't relevant, why am I naming it? Because I'm reinforcing always racializing people of color and never racializing white people. So that's my quick answer.
All right, thank you.
So I have a question about your rhetoric. So in Audrey and Brian Smedley's book, Race in North America, they constantly refer to the what you refer to as racism as racialization and racialized thinking in America. So I was just curious about your choice of the word racism as opposed to racialization.
Oh, racism versus racialization. Actually, well, I would think about the equivalent would be race versus racialization. So if I understand you correctly, the reason they're using racialization in the same way we often talk to, now more sociologists are saying minoritized, is to communicate that this is an active process that is happening to people, that they are not inherently a minority, but they've been minoritized. We have been racialized, whereas I am not racialized, right, in the construct. I think it's an effective way to use language to push at this idea that these are fixed categories rather than socially constructed categories. So I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Hi. Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm a junior double major in dance and anthropology. And I was wondering if you could maybe comment a little bit on the intersectionality of, in new racism, of people that have a history of not being white in their family but have the appearance of being white, thinking a lot about the Native American experience and often the assumption of whiteness and how that plays into being able to hide behind your perceived skin color.
Yeah, thank you. So no matter who we are, where we are, right, our identities intersect in complex ways, and all of us want to be looking at how do all those different intersections set us up to collude with these systems. And they do in different ways, right? So the multiracial experience for people who look white is really unique and kind of complex, right? I mean, it's all complex, but because internally you have your own identity, your own experience, your own relationships, but people are responding to you as if you're white. And it puts you in a really interesting kind of unique position. In some ways, it gives you both insider and outsider awareness. And white people will often reveal things that they wouldn't reveal if they didn't know you, right? So you kind of in this, which can be really painful, but it also gives you a place to push on it because they showed it to you, right? And so the question for me isn't are you more or less or anything else like that, but just kind of looking at how did all of that set you up and what would be your work? What would be the most powerful work for you to do to help challenge whatever role you've been playing? Yeah. And there's a really beautiful book, I think it's called What Are You? But Maria Root, R-O-O-T, she writes about the multiracial experience, and she's got this multiracial Bill of Rights, and it's really powerful, and it's like I have the right to identify, and usually that's really helpful for people. So no matter what your other identities are, let me take this as an opportunity. I grew up poor, and I mean that. I mean homelessness, foster care, shame, deep shame, late to college, the whole thing. And so now that I'm in academia, or when I was in academia, I definitely had that internal imposter syndrome, right? That kind of, and when I would be in these meetings and something was being discussed, it was as clearly racist the way we were going about something. Maybe we were looking at a job applicant and talking about who would be a better fit. This is often the way white people reproduce themselves on search committees. And I'd be seen, but I would be intimidated to say anything because I feel inferior. I don't feel as smart. And they're going to quote some Foucault or something. And I didn't read it. And okay. And I sat there and I realized, okay, it really is a feeling of inferiority that is keeping me silent right now, right? But how is it functioning? I had to go, oh my God, it's totally maintaining white solidarity. It's protecting my privilege and position. I'm coming across as a team player. I'm in no way backing any person of color in this room. Oh my God, I am colluding with racism. I'm colluding with someone else's oppression, even though the pattern is rooted in inferiority. So that's not okay. And in fact, it's a lie that I'm not as smart as these people. By the way, the cream of the crop is not who goes to college. Just got to tell you that. It's about access. So it is a lie that I'm not as smart as these people because I grew up poor. And so when I open my mouth and push through my own internalized inferiority, I'm simultaneously healing that lie that I've bought into and using my privileged position to advocate for someone else. So for me, centering race is a really powerful way to get at all your identities. So the question you want to ask is, what patterns have I developed as a result of where I've been oppressed, in surviving that oppression? And so then how is that keeping me polluting? That was kind of long, but you gave me the opportunity. I think it's over here now, right? Okay.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm a senior sociology major. And so here at FNM lately, we've been having a lot of talks and forums about race. And I feel like the question has come up of allyship. And so there are a lot of white people who want to be allies, and there's a big range. Like, some people are like overbearing, and some people don't know at all what it means to be an ally. So can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be an ally, and how can people be good allies?
I'm so glad you asked me that. Yes. Okay, just really quick, there's so many good resources, videos, and everything out there. And if you on my website, there's 10 simple ways, so that's there. Let me just say this. I've committed my life to anti-racist work, but I do not call myself an anti-racist white, and I do not call myself an ally. And that's because that is for people of color to decide if in any given moment I am behaving in allied ways. I am the least capable of making that determination, least likely to understand it, most invested in not seeing it. And that reminds me, right, that I'm never arrived, right? It's a journey, not a destination. So in any given moment means, how am I doing now? Maybe I did well yesterday in class, but in this moment, how am I doing, right? And that I have to be accountable to people of color. And many white people who position themselves as allies, actually, how do you know? Right? You're not actually accountable. And it's similar, I don't know how this will land on you, but when a man tells me he's a feminist, the bubble over my head is, I'll be the judge of that. Okay, seriously. And usually I'm thinking, oh my God, you're the last person I think is feminist. How about if you just stop talking right now? So those are my thoughts. It's a place of humility. It's a place of action, right? But also accountability.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Lucera. I'm a senior neuroscience major. I first just want to thank you for being here. This was the best thing that ever happened. So, as Ashley mentioned, there have been a lot of talks about race on campus, and a lot of these talks have been led by people of color, and the reception to that has been very negative, and people have felt like they have been attacked and such. So I just wish, or I hope that you can maybe talk to like why some people feel like they're attacked when these issues are brought up by people of color. However, right now, I'm sure people don't feel too attacked, but you're talking about it and you're white, and like the power that you have because you're white and you're bringing this up compared to like people of color talking about it and then them being like attacked back.
So because a whole bunch of people leave, and let me say really quick, white folks, knock it off, okay? Knock off the nonsense. We're not attacked. And people of color, here's my question back to us. What are the rules for how people should share their pain with us? What are the rules? And where did you get them? And who do they serve, right? It's on us to bear witness to the pain of racism. And if you need to yell, if you need to cry, if you need to vent, I can handle it. It's about me, but it's not about me, right? I did that thing, but I'm also a representative. And probably if you're doing it in that moment, you feel safe enough to show that. Most of the time, it's just sucked down in order to survive, okay? So you're not attacked. Just call that what it is. That's white fragility. And so educate yourself on it, breathe, relax, and let go of all your criteria, again, for how someone should tell you that you hurt them. Okay? I don't know. I hope that speaks to it. And the reality is, it is amazing to me what I get away with saying to white people that you couldn't get away with saying. It's true. And it's a little bit of the master's tools because I'm reinforcing the white voice. But if I can be heard by God, to not use this position is really to be white. And that's not acceptable either. So in a really kind of interesting way, you have to center whiteness in order to decenter it, but you have to center it in a really different way. It remains centered now by being unmarked and unnamed. So to center it and then speak truth to it is to put a light on it, and it's like with those little roaches that run with it. Thanks. I have a feeling this is going to be a
Thank you, and remember that.